was said to as the Beatles' spiritual essence, or the quiet one. George Harrison subtly developed his own identity within the band, while Lennon and McCartney enjoyed the limelight. But there was a deep-seated animosity simmering beneath that composed exterior. Few ever anticipated it. Who then was the real target of George's suppressed rage? Was the spotlight stolen by a bandmate, a boss who made the decisions, or perhaps someone even stranger? We reveal the most intricate and somewhat unexpected relationship in the history of the Beatles today, because there is a grudge that could permanently alter our perception of the Fab Four hidden behind the music and notoriety. Hold on tight as we reveal the truth about the person George Harrison hated the most. Although the songwriting competition between John Lennon and Paul McCartney is widely known, rumors of a second tense relationship have persisted for years. This time George Harrison and the one person he purportedly had a strong dislike for are the main subjects. The band's power and creative control dynamics frequently caused conflict, especially with Harrison, who wanted greater creative input and credit for his work. Paul McCartney and John Lennon were always in the background. But let's go back to the beginning before we get to that. Childhood. On February 25, 1943, George Harrison was born at 12 Arnold Grove in Wolvertree, Liverpool. He was the youngest of Harold Hargreaves, Harrison, and Louise Harrison's 4 children. While Louise was of Irish Catholic heritage and worked as a shop assistant, Harold was a bus conductor and had previously served as a ship's steward for the White Star Line. George had 3 siblings, 2 older brothers, Harold and Peter, and an older sister, Louise. Boyd, Harrison's biographer, claims that George's mother Louise was especially encouraging of her children's pleasure and acknowledged that George found satisfaction in his love of music. George Harrison's mother Louise Harrison loved music and was well known for her vivacious singing which could clack the windows of their house, much to the tourists' amazement. In the hopes that her unborn child would find peace and tranquility in the exotic sounds of sitars and tablas, she often listened to Radio India broadcasts during her pregnancy with George. According to Joshua Green, Harrison's biographer, she listened to the ethereal sounds of sitars and tablas every Sunday, wishing that the exotic music would help the unborn child feel at ease and at peace. George spent his first 4 years of life with the Harrison family in 12 Arnold Grove, a small terraced home in Wolvertree, Liverpool. With only one coal fire for warmth and an outdoor toilet, the residence lacked contemporary conveniences. The family relocated to a Speke municipal home at 25 Upton Green in 1949. George started attending Dovedale Primary School when he was 5 years old. From 1954 till the age of 19, he attended Liverpool Institute High School for boys after passing the 11+ test. George believed the classroom atmosphere was oppressive and was upset that there were no guitars available, even though the institution offered a music course. Early musical influences on George Harrison were varied and influential. During his early years in the 1950s, he was influenced by performers like Lonnie Donegan, Hoagy Carmichael, Carl Perkins, Django Reinhardt, George Formby, and Cab Calloway. But he was profoundly affected by a turning point in early 1956. He heard Heartbreak Hotel by Elvis Presley when he was riding his bicycle. His interest in rock and roll began when he heard them perform from a nearby home. At Liverpool Institute High School for boys, Harrison's love of music was apparent even then. Frequently he would draw guitars in his textbooks and proclaim, "I was really into guitars." His fascination with the guitar was further stoked by Slim Whitman, whom he saw on television or in a magazine. When Harrison's buddy Raymond Hughes volunteered to buy him a guitar when he was 14 years old, Harrison's musical career took a more pragmatic turn. When inflation is taken into account, the £310 his mother Louise paid for it would be roughly £110 in 2024. Harrison's guitar career began when he learned several core tunes, including Whispering, Sweet Sue, and Dinah from a family friend. Harrison founded the Rebels, a skiffle group, with his brother Peter and friend Arthur Kelly, after being influenced by Lonnie Donegan's skiffle songs. He first met Paul McCartney on the school bus during this period. That marked the start of a friendship and musical collaboration that would last a lifetime and influence the development of music history. Early career, George Harrison tried out for the Quarrymen, a skiffle group led by John Lennon and Paul McCartney, at Rory Storm's Morgue Skiffle Club in March 1958. Harrison had just turned 15, so Lennon initially thought he was too young to participate. However, Harrison wowed Lennon by playing the lead guitar part for Raunchy during a second audition that McCartney set up on a bus in Liverpool. Harrison finally became a full member of the group as a result of this. Harrison left school at the age of 16 to begin an apprenticeship as an electrician at Blackler's, a nearby department store, despite his father's desire for him to finish his studies. Inspired by the musician Carl Perkins, Harrison adopted the pseudonym Carl Harrison for the Quarrymen's first Scottish tour in 1960. Harrison's adventure with the Beatles began around this time, and his guitar prowess and musical contributions would play a crucial role in the development and success of the band. Under Alan Williams' direction, the Beatles were able to land performances at Bruno Koschmider's Indra and Kaiser Keller clubs in Hamburg in 1960. This was their first stay in Hamburg, where they started to hone their musical abilities in the city's thriving club culture. However, George Harrison's deportation while still a minor due to his inability to work lawfully in nightclubs ended their stay. After taking over as manager in December 1961, Brian Epstein improved their public image and eventually landed them a recording deal with ME. After being released, their first single, Love Me Do, peaked at number 17 on the record retailer chart. As Beatlemania swept the world the next year, their debut album, Please Please Me, catapulted them into the stratosphere of stardom. George Harrison gained the moniker, the Quiet Beatle, due to his solemn and concentrated performance style. This term gained popularity when the Beatles arrived in the U.S. in early 1964, when Harrison was very ill with a fever and strep throat. He was advised by medical professionals to hold back on speaking until their planned appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show, which marked the Beatles' historic television debut and contributed to their global fame. During the Beatles' tours, George Harrison's reputation as the Quiet Beatle solidified as his quiet demeanor contrasted with that of his more talkative bandmates. Harrison found this press-created moniker humorous, and it stuck with him throughout his career. Harrison's influence within the Beatles started to show in their music. On the Beatles' debut album, he earned 2 lead vocal credits, including the well-known song Do You Want to Know a Secret, which was written by Lennon and McCartney. Harrison has 3 lead vocal credits on their second album, with the Beatles, 1963, including his first solo authorship credit on Don't Bother Me. Harrison was a key member of the Beatles' scout team for new American albums, especially in the soul genre. By the time Rubber Soul came out in 1965, his taste in music had further broadened, and he guided the group toward folk rock elements influenced by Bob Dylan and the Beatles. He also started experimenting with Indian classical music, most notably with the sitar in Norwegian wood, This Bird Has Flown. Harrison subsequently stated that his favorite Beatles album is Rubber Soul. Harrison's developing skills as a band inventor and songwriter were on full display in the 1966 album Revolver. Among his works were I Want to Tell You and Taxman, which started the album Love You Too, and featured Indian musical elements like the sitar and tabla. The Beatles' investigation of non-Western instruments and sounds was emphasized by Harrison's tambura part in Lennon's Tomorrow Never Knows, which further broadened their musical horizons. George Harrison's investigation of Indian music and spirituality marked a dramatic shift in the Beatles' musical trajectory. According to ethnomusicologist David Reck, his usage of the sitar on Norwegian wood signified a respectable portrayal of Asian culture in mainstream music. By the time of Revolver in 1966, Harrison's influence extended with songs like Love You Too, earning him the nickname the Maharaja of Raga Rock. His interest in non-Western instruments continued in Strawberry Fields Forever, where he played the swar-mandal. By 1967, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, Harrison's spiritual pursuits were evident with his composition, Within You, Without You, featuring sitar and tambura. He chose to depict Eastern gurus on the album cover, reflecting his deepening exploration of Eastern philosophies. Harrison had mixed feelings about Sgt. Pepper, calling it both a milestone and a burden in the music industry. His journey with Indian music not only shaped his contributions to the Beatles, but also left a lasting impact on Western popular culture's acceptance of Eastern musical traditions. In January 1968, George Harrison recorded The Inner Light at EMI's Bombay studio with local Indian musicians, marking his first Beatles single with a composition inspired by Hinduism and meditation. During the tumultuous recording of the Beatles' White Album later that year, tensions peaked within the group, leading to Ringo Starr briefly leaving. Harrison's contributions included While My Guitar Gently Weeps, featuring Eric Clapton and the upbeat Savoy Truffle. By late 1968, Harrison found inspiration from Bob Dylan and the band's communal music approach during a visit to Woodstock. This influenced his desire for creative freedom, which clashed with Lennon and McCartney's dominance within the Beatles. Tensions escalated during the Let It Be filming at Twickenham Studios in early 1969. This prompted Harrison to quit the band on the 10th of January, disillusioned with the studio environment and interpersonal dynamics. Harrison reunion with the group. After briefly leaving the band in January 1969, George Harrison returned 12 days later when the Beatles agreed to relocate their film project to Apple Studio and abandoned Paul McCartney's idea of returning to public performances. Despite improved relations, tensions persisted during the recording of their 1969 album Abbey Road. Harrison's contributions to Abbey Road included what music historian Lavezzoli described as two classic tracks, Here Comes the Sun and Something. These songs marked a significant milestone for Harrison, as he finally achieved equal songwriting status alongside Lennon and McCartney. Something was particularly notable, becoming his first A-side when released on a double A-side single with Come Together. The song topped charts in Canada, Australia, New Zealand and West Germany, and both sides of the single reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 chart in the United States. In the 1970s, Frank Sinatra recorded George Harrison's song twice in 1970 and 1979, and praised it as the greatest love song of the past 50 years. John Lennon also regarded it highly, considering it the best song on Abbey Road. Something became one of the most covered Beatles songs, following closely behind Yesterday. In May 1970, Harrison achieved his second chart topper with the U.S. single release of For You Blue, coupled with McCartney's The Long and Winding Road, reaching #1 on the Hot 100. By this time, Harrison had accumulated a significant collection of unreleased compositions, reflecting his increased productivity. Despite his growth as a songwriter, Harrison's frustration grew within the Beatles. Due to his limited presence on their albums, typically contributing only 2 or 3 songs. This dissatisfaction was a significant factor contributing to the band's eventual breakup. Harrison's final recording session with the Beatles took place on 4th of January, 1970, when McCartney and Starr added overdubs to Let It Be for the soundtrack album of the same name. However, all of the band's recordings were full of ups and downs. The dynamics of power and creative control within the band often played a role in shaping their interactions and occasionally led to friction. This led to George Harrison harboring a deep animosity towards one of his band members. George and McCarthy feud. Throughout most of their career, the Beatles maintained incredibly close relationships within the group. According to Hunter Davies, they didn't live a communal life, but shared their lives communally. They were each other's closest friends. George Harrison's ex-wife, Pattie Boyd, reflected on how the Beatles had a unique bond, expressing that they all belonged to each other. She acknowledged that there were aspects of their relationship that she, as well as other spouses, could never fully understand or penetrate. Ringo Starr also emphasized the deep camaraderie among the Beatles. He recalled how they looked out for each other, shared many laughs, and cherished moments of togetherness. Even in the smallest spaces, like hotel bathrooms. Starr described these moments as filled with love and care, highlighting the extraordinary closeness among the 4 of them. The relationship between George Harrison and Paul McCartney, two of the Beatles' core members, was multifaceted and evolved significantly throughout their years together in the band. Out of the four, Harrison and McCartney met first as young boys on a school bus, and quickly bonded over their shared passion for music. They often learned and rehearsed new guitar chords together, laying the foundation for their musical partnership with the Beatles. McCartney has fondly referred to Harrison as his baby brother, indicating a close and familial bond that extended beyond their musical collaboration. However, despite their camaraderie, tensions occasionally surfaced between Harrison and McCartney, especially as the Beatles' dynamic shifted over the years. The creation of the groundbreaking album Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band in 1967 marked a turning point. Widely regarded as a masterpiece, the album was primarily driven by Paul McCartney's creative vision. This period saw McCartney taking a more dominant role in shaping the band's direction, which sometimes overshadowed Harrison's contributions. Before 1969, Harrison struggled to gain equal recognition alongside John Lennon and Paul McCartney as a songwriter and creative force within the Beatles. His compositions were often relegated to a secondary status compared to those of Lennon and McCartney, who were the primary songwriters for the group. This imbalance led to frustrations for Harrison, who desired more creative control over his music. By the time of the recording of Abbey Road in 1969, tensions between Harrison and McCartney came to a head. Harrison asserted himself more forcefully, rejecting McCartney's suggestions for changes to his songs. This marked a significant shift, where Harrison began to assert his creative independence and demand recognition for his artistic contributions within the band. In a revealing conversation captured by writer Anthony Fawcett and chronicled in Barry Miles' biography, Paul McCartney, Many Years From Now, 1998, Paul McCartney and George Harrison's dynamic within the Beatles is illuminated. McCartney, known for his candid assessments, acknowledged a shift in songwriting prowess between himself and Harrison. He remarked to John Lennon, "Well, the thing is, I think that until now, until this year, our songs have been better than George's. Now this year, his songs are at least as good as ours." However, Harrison's response to McCartney's assessment appeared to dismiss the comparison. Harrison countered, suggesting that the timeline of songwriting didn't necessarily align with McCartney's perception of a sudden improvement. He stated, "That's a myth, because most of the songs this year I wrote last year or the year before anyway. Maybe now I just don't care whether you are going to like them or not. I just do them." This exchange highlights a deeper tension within the Beatles regarding creative recognition and control. McCartney's acknowledgement of Harrison's songwriting evolution reflects a begrudging acceptance of Harrison's growing stature as a songwriter within the band. In contrast, Harrison's assertion that he writes for himself rather than seeking approval shows his desire for autonomy and artistic expression. George Harrison's musical relationship with Paul McCartney was often filled with tension and creative differences. In a 1974 interview quoted in Ashley Kahn's George Harrison on George Harrison Interviews and Encounters, Harrison expressed his preference for other musicians over McCartney, would rather have Willie Weeks on bass than Paul McCartney. He stated, "That's the truth. With all respect to Paul. Paul is a fine bass player, but he's a bit overpowering at times. I would join a band with John Lennon any day, but I could not join a band with Paul McCartney. But it's nothing personal. It's just from a musical point of view." Harrison respected McCartney's musical talents, but found his approach often overwhelming. This dynamic was particularly evident during the recording sessions for McCartney's song Maxwell's Silver Hammer in 1969. Harrison detailed the experience, noting, "Paul would always help along when you'd done his 10 songs. Then when he got round to doing one of my songs, he would help. It was silly. It was very selfish. Sometimes Paul would make us do these fruity songs. I mean, my God, Maxwell's Silver Hammer was so fruity. After a while we did a good job on it. But when Paul got an idea or an arrangement in his head," Harrison's remarks reflect his frustration with what he perceived as McCartney's domineering nature in the studio. While McCartney's perfectionism and detailed arrangements contributed to the Beatles' success, they also led to conflicts, particularly with Harrison, who sought more creative input and recognition for his contributions. George Harrison's relationship with Paul McCartney was further strained by what Harrison perceived as McCartney's underestimation of his songwriting abilities. During a 2020 interview, Howard Stern asked McCartney if he thought he had underestimated Harrison's songwriting prowess while the band was together. McCartney's response shed light on the dynamics within the Beatles. "It was easy to underestimate George because me and John, as you said, had always written most of the stuff and had had most of the singles. And George was a late bloomer as far as writing was concerned. He wasn't that interested in the beginning, but then he started to get interested, and boy did he bloom, you know. He wrote some of the greatest songs ever." This acknowledgement came long after the band's breakup, and highlighted a critical issue that had contributed to Harrison's frustration during their time together. McCartney and Lennon were the dominant songwriters, which often left Harrison's contributions overshadowed and underappreciated. Harrison's struggle for recognition and creative input was a recurring theme throughout the Beatles' career, leading to significant tension, especially as his songwriting skills matured. Harrison's dissatisfaction was not just about the number of songs he was allowed to contribute, but also about the lack of respect and support for his musical ideas. McCartney's dominance in the studio often meant that Harrison's songs received less attention and enthusiasm. This was particularly evident in the recording of tracks like Maxwell's Silver Hammer, where Harrison felt that McCartney's controlling nature stifled his creative expression. In a 1974 BBC radio interview with Alan Freeman, George Harrison articulated the complex and often strained relationship he had with Paul McCartney. He candidly stated, "McCartney ruined me as a guitar player," reflecting his frustration with McCartney's domineering approach during their time with the Beatles. Despite this, Harrison acknowledged the deep, complicated bond they shared, stating, "I just know that whatever we've been through, there's always been something that's tied us together." This bond was rooted in their shared history and the immense musical journey they embarked on together. However, it was also marked by significant obstacles, particularly their relationship, which proved to be a considerable barrier to a potential Beatles reunion. After John Lennon's death, on February 11, 1994, George Harrison, Paul McCartney, and Ringo Starr reunited in McCartney's studio, forming what was affectionately dubbed the Threetles. They collaborated on reviving unused John Lennon demos, even though Harrison and McCartney still had some disagreements over the songs. Both Harrison and McCartney admitted that they often got on each other's nerves, highlighting the persistent tension that existed between them. The relationship between George Harrison and Paul McCartney remained complex and occasionally tumultuous throughout their lives. Even up until Harrison's final days, observers like Rodriguez noted the volatility that marked their interactions. In a Yahoo Online chat in February 2001, when asked if McCartney annoyed him, Harrison responded with a quote, "Scan not a friend with a microscopic glass. You know his faults. Then let his foibles pass." Old Victorian proverb. This reflected Harrison's philosophical approach to their relationship, acknowledging their differences while highlighting a sense of acceptance and maturity that had developed over time. George Harrison passed away on November 29, 2001, at the age of 58. His death came after a prolonged battle with cancer. He had undergone surgery for throat cancer in 1998 and received treatment for lung cancer and a brain tumor in 2001. Reflecting on Harrison's final days, Paul McCartney shared his memories during a 2008 interview for Uncut. "I sat with him for the few hours, when he was in treatment just outside New York," McCartney recalled. "He was about 10 days away from his death, as I recall. We joked about things, just amusing, nutty stuff. It was good. It was like we were dreaming. He was my baby brother almost because I'd known him that long. We held hands. It's funny, even at the height of our friendship as guys you would never hold hands. It just wasn't a Liverpool thing, but it was lovely." The day after Harrison's death, McCartney spoke to reporters about his late friend, reflecting on their long and complex relationship. "He was a lovely guy and a very brave man and had a wonderful sense of humor," McCartney said. "He is just my baby brother." This heartfelt tribute showed the deep affection McCartney felt for Harrison. Despite their ups and downs, both Harrison and McCartney grew to appreciate each other more as they aged. McCartney's daughter Stella, born in 1971, and Harrison's son Donnie, born in 1978, grew up in the shadow of their father's fame, but forged a sibling-like relationship of their own. Stella McCartney spoke warmly about Martin Scorsese's documentary, Living in the Material World. Particularly moved when Donnie Harrison read out his father's parts. She expressed a deep emotional connection to George Harrison's legacy and the importance of preserving his memory. Their bond extended beyond familial ties into professional support and personal admiration. Stella designed the wedding dress for Donnie's wife, Solveig Karadotir, in 2012, showcasing their close relationship and mutual respect. In 2014, Donnie surprised Stella at a gala by performing his father's iconic song Live and Let Die, a gesture that underscored their shared reverence for George Harrison's musical contributions and the enduring connection between their families. Through their shared experiences and tributes to their fathers, Stella and Donnie Harrison exemplify how the legacy of the Beatles continues to influence and inspire new generations. Despite the complexities and occasional tensions between their fathers, their children have forged a supportive and loving relationship that honors the enduring impact of the Beatles' music and the bonds of family and friendship. George Harrison's personal life was marked by notable relationships and marriages. Personal life. He first married model Pattie Boyd on January 21, 1966, with Paul McCartney serving as his best man. Harrison and Boyd initially met on the set of the Beatles' film A Hard Day's Night in 1964, where Boyd, then 19 years old, had a role as a schoolgirl. Their relationship began playfully when Harrison proposed to her during a lunch break. However, their marriage faced challenges, particularly due to Harrison's infidelity. Boyd cited his repeated unfaithfulness as a major reason for their separation in 1974, which ultimately led to their divorce being finalized in 1977. The final blow to their marriage was Harrison's affair with Maureen Starkey, Ringo Starr's wife, which Boyd described as the final straw. Boyd recounted that the last year of their marriage was tumultuous, marred by substance abuse issues. She attributed Harrison's excessive cocaine use to changing him emotionally, stating that it froze his emotions and hardened his heart. After their divorce, Boyd moved in with and later married Eric Clapton in 1979. On September 2, 1978, Harrison married Olivia Trinidad Arias, who had worked as a marketing executive for A&M Records and later for Dark Horse Records, Harrison's label. George Harrison's life extended beyond music into other passions and interests, notably sports cars and motor racing. His enthusiasm for automobiles began early, influenced by his attendance at the 1955 British Grand Prix at Aintree when he was just 12 years old. Over the years, he developed a keen interest in collecting photos of racing drivers and their cars, which grew alongside his admiration for Formula One racing. Harrison and Olivia's marriage endured until George Harrison's passing in 2001. Olivia played a significant role in supporting Harrison through his health challenges. She continued to protect his legacy after his death. Harrison legacy. George Harrison's posthumous recognition and legacy have been celebrated through various honors and tributes, underscoring his profound impact on music and popular culture. In 2004, Harrison was posthumously inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as a solo artist, a testament to his significant contributions beyond his role in the Beatles. His former bandmates Jeff Lynne and Tom Petty, who collaborated with Harrison in the Traveling Wilburys, were instrumental in presenting him with this prestigious accolade. This recognition highlighted Harrison's evolution as a songwriter, musician, and cultural icon, independent of his Beatles legacy. Another noteworthy honor came in 2006, when Harrison was inducted into the Madison Square Garden Walk of Fame for his pivotal role in organizing the concert for Bangladesh. This historic event, organized by Harrison in 1971, was one of the first major rock benefit concerts and raised awareness and funds for humanitarian aid to Bangladesh. On April 14, 2009, Harrison received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in front of the Capitol Records building in Los Angeles. The ceremony was attended by his widow, Olivia Harrison, along with his former bandmates Paul McCartney, Jeff Lynne, and Tom Petty. The unveiling of Harrison's star was a poignant moment, marked by heartfelt speeches honoring his musical legacy and cultural contributions. Harrison's son Donnie also participated in the ceremony, adding a spiritual touch by chanting the Hare Krishna mantra, reflecting his father's deep spiritual beliefs and influences. In addition to